I love Albert's book, but it was written at the height of the Cold War. It came out just before the fall of the Berlin Wall, or he finished it just before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I think that there was a need for a book that addressed the post-Cold War era and would bring us up to, indeed, the post-9/11 era. The Arabs, is it such an original subject? Well, I went to the Oxford University Library catalog and found no fewer than 16 editions entitled The Arabs from the 1940s to the present. 4 of them published by my British publisher, Penguin. 2 of them published by my hometown press, the Oxford University Press. So I seem to be in something of a title deadlock in calling this book The Arabs. But I believe that the Arab world is such a significant place geostrategically, and has come to dominate our news in such a way for different parts of the Arab world, that there will always be need for a timely and up-to-date study of this critical part of the world. And so, overlooking the obstacles of the excellent books that precede me, and perhaps the cautionary note that someone like Edward Said might make about the baggage that any Westerner brings to the study of the subject when they write from a position of power, and certainly as an American writing on the Arab world in a unipolar age of American dominance, it's very difficult to say that I'm totally free of any baggage that comes with being a dominant power of the day. Nonetheless, you have before you the fruits of my efforts. When it comes to trying to write such a big book, it is critical to have a handle on your subject. How is it that you would like to go about approaching this big and unwieldy subject? And for me, one of the defining features of modern Arab history has been that really since the time of the Ottoman conquests, the Arab world has had to negotiate the modern era by other people's rules. This handle of other people's rules allowed me to break down 5 centuries of Arab history into 4 distinct periods, according to who was making the rules at a given time. By talking about the dominant rules of the age, I don't in any way mean to take away agency from the Arab peoples across the modern centuries. The rules may be made somewhere else, but the Arabs have proved themselves over time to master the rules, to work with them where it suited them, to subvert them where it didn't suit them, and to play the different powers of the day against each other to try and achieve the most under the existing rules. But with each change in the locus of rule-making, the Arab world was driven back to relearn how best to use the rules to their advantage. This gave me a 4-period breakdown of modern Arab history, and it also gave me a starting point. I can tell you that the modern history of the Arab world began on a day in August in 1516, when a gunpowder army defeated a medieval sword-bearing army. This is when the Ottomans defeated the Mamluk Empire, and they did so in a battlefield just north of Aleppo, known as Majdabik. I am very grateful to a wonderful Mamluk chronicler by the name of Ibn Iyas for giving us a kind of detailed description of those days that would satisfy any cinematographer. You had a sense of the wind blowing through the banners and of the clothes that the people wore. And the kind of gorgeous description is any writer's dream. What a great way to begin to be able to launch your book. So the Ottomans came to dominate Egypt and the Fertile Crescent, and in the course of the 16th century extended their rule right across North Africa, by the 17th century, down to Yemen and into Mesopotamia. This was not culture shock for the peoples of the Arab world. They were used to being ruled by the dominant Islamic empire of their age. The Ottomans, like the Mamluks before them, were a Turkish-speaking ruling elite, driven from slave origins, very much like the Mamluks had been. The law and culture was founded very much in Sharia, with a certain amount of customary or urf built into it, and sultanic edicts giving a kind of imperial law added to it. But this was a legal culture that people in the Arab world felt was more continuation than change. So what was the big difference? The big difference was, for the first time in modern history, the Arabs would be ruled not by a great Arab capital, not by Damascus and not by Baghdad and not from Cairo, not from the great cities of Andalusia or of North Africa, but from Istanbul, a city that was Turkish at that point. Its origins were Byzantine, and it was quite remote from the Arab world. And this meant that the relations that the Arabs had with the power center had to cover a certain amount of distance and a language barrier if they were to play a role in the affairs of state. And in the first Ottoman centuries, they played a very limited role. They, in fact, tended to be much more local in their outlook, and by the 18th century, local politics really came to threaten the power of the central government, as people like Zahir al-Omar in the Palestinian territories, the Azam Walis in Damascus, the Jalilis in Mosul, or just outside the frontiers, if we look at the Wahhabi Saudi Confederation in the 18th century, all became Arab challenges to the rule-making authority of the Ottomans. But the Ottomans reasserted their pressure by the 19th century, just as they found themselves coming under a new external challenge. And here the ideas of the Enlightenment and the technologies of the Industrial Revolution gave Europe that edge that allowed them to begin to extend their authority across the Mediterranean, in the first instance to North Africa, where between 1830 with the French invasion of Algeria and 1911 with the Italian invasion of Libya, virtually every territory of Arab North Africa was brought under colonial rule, British, French, Spanish, or Italian. And in this, the locus of rule-making shifted already before the First World War, away from Istanbul alone to really begin to lie more in the hands of Paris and of London. And we're now entering into what we would then call the imperial age, confirmed in the aftermath of the First World War by the mandate system imposed on the remaining Arab provinces of the Ottoman Empire. So the imperial age will take us right on up to the Second World War. It's followed, of course, by the Cold War, where the locus of decision-making shifts once again to Washington and Moscow, and very different sets of rules shape that age. But the thing that brings the imperial and the Cold War eras into a common perspective is that this was a time when there were two dominant powers who acted as a check on each other. That the Arab world learned how to play the British off the French or the Soviets off the Americans to try and achieve maximum benefit politically to themselves right through the 20th century. It's been very interesting reading Yevgeny Primakov's memoirs, which have just come out under the title Russia and the Arabs. He too seems to like to put the Arabs into his title. And Primakov quite openly says that from the Soviet perspectives, the Arab tail wagged the Soviet dog. He said it of Sadat around the outbreak of the 73 war. He said it about President Hafez al-Assad, about the way in which they timed their entry into Lebanon to coincide with Premier Kosygin's visits to Damascus. The Soviets constantly found themselves being put in compromising positions by their Arab clients and their Arab allies, and in ways that created great difficulty with them in their relations with the United States. And to me, it's another sign of where the Arabs are able to take the rules, the dominant rules of the day, and use it to advantage. But just as I can give you an opening date for when the modern history of the Arab world began, I can give you a clear date of the end of the Cold War, which to me was really at the height of the Kuwait crisis after the Iraqi invasion, when the Soviet Union, and it was still the Soviet Union, voted along with the United States to support Security Council Resolution 678 in November of 2000, authorizing a United States-led coalition to use all necessary means to expel the Soviet client Iraq from Kuwait. With that, the rules had changed, and it was a warning shot sent across the bows of every Arab client of the USSR that they were now in an age where there was only one superpower that was dominating world politics. It was the United States, and it still is. In the first decade of the post-Cold War, there was a clear sense